Welcome to the Open Talent Report, the award-winning podcast where we dive deep into the emerging trends in global employment, the future of work, the talent crisis, the demographic deficit, and the new world of work with our expert host, Connor Heaney. Connor is the managing director at CXE EMEA, a company that takes the hassle out of finding, compliantly engaging and paying contractors anywhere in the world. In this podcast, Connor brings you captivating conversations with top CEOs, visionary founders, and industry experts. Together, they shed light on all things open talent and the evolving nature of work itself. So grab your headphones and join us on this exhilarating journey.
Hello and welcome to this week's show, where I am delighted to welcome Kristian Rayner, who is the Vice President of Enterprise Solutions at MBO Partners. Kristian, a warm welcome to the show. A very happy new year to you, and a very happy new year to all of our listeners. It's our first show of 2025, and we're extremely excited to have you on. How are you doing, mate? Are you keeping well?
I'm doing well. I'm honored that I'm the first of the year. I guess it can only go downhill from here, eh?
Well, Chris, we're delighted that you're here, and I think you're a great guest to kick off the year. And just for the benefit of our guests, Kristian, I've got to know you over the last 2 years, but where I got to know you before that was your prolific content on all matters talent and business on LinkedIn. So I always really enjoy our conversations, Kristian, but I also really enjoy reading your content, and we'll link that in the show notes as well, because I think for our audience, it'd really benefit from reading it as well. So, Kristian, a warm welcome to the show. Can't wait to hear your story. I think it's going to be quite varied, actually, and I don't want to preempt it too much. We're looking forward to hearing about what the challenges and problems you're solving for at MBO Partners and your team, and then getting into some of the things that we really love to talk about. So, Kristian, what is your story? How did you become the Vice President of Enterprise Solutions at MBO Partners? And what was your journey? Because for me, this is sometimes the most interesting part of this show.
Yeah, look, as a kid, I dreamt of being in contingent staffing. It was something that I always loved to do. It was either that or being a professional football player or soccer player, depending on what side of the ocean folks are listening on. But I didn't play well enough, so I went into contingent. No, honestly, by accident more than anything. My background, actually, I went to university to study physical therapy. I was a Pilates instructor. I did acupuncture. I did sports medicine. I worked for a Premier League football team on weekends, supporting their academy, on pitch injuries and all that good stuff. And I always thought that was it. That was going to be the career path that I went. You can tell I've got a bit of a weird accent. So I didn't grow up here in the States, grew up in the UK. And then I moved into the NHS, the National Health Service. And when I was there, again, pursuing that healthcare path, but I moved into project management, again, by accident, right? I think a lot of things in life is exactly that, fate and accidents. We were moving from a couple of old hospitals in Peterborough, not far from Cambridge, and we're moving to this brand new facility. And they said, "Hey, does anyone want to volunteer and help with managing that project?" And nobody around the room put their hand up, and I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." Well, long story short, that turned into a permanent secondment, right? We did that for 9 months, and then we moved into the new place, and they said, "Hey, you did a great job. We want you to stay in projects." So I thought that was the next path. So I did that. Moved to the States, went to a couple of different companies doing project management, one for an immigration company, one for a software company. And then randomly got a call from MBO Partners about 7 years ago and said, "It looks like you're focused on the professional services vertical. We're looking at bringing in somebody that does that. How much do you know about independent contractors and contingent workforce?" I'm like, "Well, I've never heard those phrases before, so please enlighten me." And, conversations went, and I'm still here. What I've done over the past number of years is to broaden to manage the sales team here at MBO. Obviously, we've got tremendous team, tremendous background in terms of the experience that we have, and our leadership team. We've been around for a while, right? We're a nearly 30-year-old company. So, it's been a great ride, but yeah, very, very different to the journey that I set about when I went to university.
Wow, this is why I love doing the show. One of the many reasons, Christian, just to hear the variety of expertise and experience for executives in the human capital sector and space. So, Christian, I hope you don't mind me asking this, but what was it like being a British or an English fellow moving to the United States? Like, it must have been a bit of an adjustment because for me, the United States is about opportunity, positivity. If you get knocked down, you get back up again. And having lived and worked in both the UK and Ireland for many years, but traveled a lot in the USA, I always love that sort of ethos and spirit in the USA. And I'm not saying that people in the UK are negative Nancy's or trying to diminish things, but there's a very different mindset, I feel,
There
from
is.
the UK and Ireland and maybe Western Europe to the USA. So what was that part of your journey like, Christian? And what was your observations thinking back?
Yeah. I think you're right in terms of that. I think in England, particularly, growing up, it was very much a class system, and what you're born into is what you'll be in forever, right? Even think about that around travel. Oh, I've never gone outside of my town. I've no reason to. This is where, I mean, I look at my nan who, bless her, she just came here for Christmas, which was amazing. 84 years old.
Wow.
And she, she came over. She had the time of her life. We took her to West Virginia on a day. We took her to Maryland. She's like, oh, I've got all these things to tell my friends when I get home. But yeah, here I would say that, it's cliche, but the American dream, you can be whatever you want to be, is very much the ethos within family life, within, on the corporate side of the house, right? If you want to go to the top of the company and you want to lead teams, whatever, you can. You've got to have a strong work ethic and you'll get there. So I definitely agree with that. I think the biggest thing I had to get my head around is everybody thought England was London and London was England. Where in London do you live? Well, I actually grew up about 4 hours drive north of there. Oh, okay, so pretty nearby, I guess. And my wife found it hilarious because she's Canadian, moved to the States when she was maybe 10. And then did a study abroad in England, and that's where we met. And that was
Wow.
a long time, about 20 years ago. And her as an American going over there, she was the shiny object. Oh, I love your accent. Where are you from? Do you know the president? Did you grow up in New York City? So I kind of saw that. I thought it was hilarious. Came here, same thing. It stopped being funny after a while. It was like, where are you from? What part are you from? And the first part always give almost like street directions. Well, I'm from here, and do you know here? And they go, oh, is that London? But no, I think definitely the cultural piece is a big difference. Yeah, that class system, it still exists here, of course. It exists everywhere, but I think there's that drive and certainly the enablement to better yourself.
Yeah, it's a fascinating place to do business, Christian, and it sounds like a fascinating place to live and to work, particularly if you've come from this side of the pond where I'm based in Ireland and the UK. So, Christian, what about MBO Partners? So, again, this is really for the benefit of our audience, some of whom may or may not have heard of MBO Partners. So, what are the typical problems and challenges that MBO Partners and your team solve for, Christian?
Yeah, I think it breaks into two constituents, right? So the first of which is really where the business was founded back in '96. Our founder at the time, realized that there was a gap. There was a growing amount, not a huge amount back then. We'll probably dig into some of the trends as we go through this conversation, but there was a growing amount of people that wanted to go and work for themselves, but they didn't have the support to set up a business, run their business, find the next project, and what have you. So we certainly support the talent side of the house. And for us, it's predominantly, the higher earner, the independents, that this is their career, this is their livelihood. It's not hey, I'm going to do a little bit of a side project here, make a couple of pennies and cents here. It's really the folks that want to set up a business. So that's an area that we've been supporting since 1996. The other side of the business is where I sit, and that's on the enterprise side. So on the enterprise side, we're helping our customers. In some cases, they're looking to get into using contingent work, right, and contingent workers, and they need some help and some consulting around, well, what do we need? What's important? What does a program look like? What are some of the challenges that we have? What's the technology, the people, the services that we need? And then we've got other clients who've been doing it a long old time, And they've realized that when you start to double click and you've got all the things around, global talent mobility, you've got the risk and compliance considerations and issues. When you hear things like misclassification, co-employment, it's not just a cool word that you see in an article. There's actually financial ramifications that come with huge, right? So for the enterprise side, it's helping them really access and compliantly engage that talent. And again, it's really focused on those independent professionals.
Thanks, Kristian, for that. Kristian, a question just occurred to me when you were talking about those sort of higher end independent contractors. It strikes me that there's essentially two markets, right? When it comes to independent contractors, there's what I would call high end, high choice, high cost, right? And high negotiation power. And those workers, I would say, have independence, autonomy. They typically can work anywhere. They can name their price. They've got a company structure set up, and then you've got what I've coined as, and it's not meant as an unfair description, Kristian, but I would categorize the other type of worker as low choice, low cost, and typically they're workers in the gig economy,
Yeah.
engaged through some sort of platform or whatever, but normally through a technology platform, and they've got limited bargaining power, limited choice, and in some respects limited opportunity, and they're paid the less. And in my view, there's almost two markets as a result of that. The first part of the market, in my view, should have less regulations, but some regulations. But the second part of that market, that low choice, low cost market, it strikes me that those workers should have protection because they need it, because their life and their working life is particularly precarious. Now, I know your company focuses on the high choice, high cost market, and we'll come on to that in a second if we can. But what's your view on those, on what I might unfairly or crudely describe as low choice, low cost workers? Should they have more protection than those high cost, high choice workers that can work wherever they want, work remotely, and name their price and have high bargaining and negotiation power and that company structure typically to protect them?
Yeah. I mean, particularly here in the States, there's been a number of pretty prominent cases and rules and regulations that have come in. You've got to look at AB5 in California, New Jersey, Massachusetts are a couple of states as well where it's a pretty hot topic. And I would agree, I think the protections are necessary, because if you look at the challenge that they've got, as you mentioned, it's low cost, but it's the highest risk of exploitation, right? These are folks that are delivering, your food orders off of, all of the mobile apps. It's the Uber drivers where they've got to pay a big slice of their income to the matching algorithm, essentially, right? So I do think there's that. I think there's also more and more people have gone into the gig economy in some cases to support what they do on their full time. There's a big population, unfortunately, obviously during COVID this happened, that they had to not just rely on that as a side income, they relied on that as their income. So that room for exploitation has certainly grown. So yeah, I'm all for the protections. I fully agree with it. What's happened, unfortunately, and I know you said we'll get into it, is that it's almost been a broad stroke that AB5 is a great example, right?
Yes.
AB5 was designed to help the Uber driver make sure that he or she is getting paid the right amount of money that they should. I mean, they're using their vehicle, they're using their time. But the regulations were essentially, I mean, there's some room for interpretation, but essentially the same for that retired executive who's decided, hey, you know what, actually, I've got my LLC. I want to come back and do some work, and, I want to charge 100, 150 an hour type thing. They are very, very different projects, very, very different rules. So having a broad stroke regulation and consideration, it's like everybody it's like saying everybody in America has to wear shoe size 9, right? It's just not going to work.
Kristian, I completely subscribe to that view about the protection for the low choice, low cost. But in my view, if you're taking the risks with a higher choice, higher cost, more mature worker with the protections of their own company, they're working on their own account, they've got their own equipment, they've got their own insurance, then in a way, I feel that the market should dictate how they're engaged. But I think that's a challenge that we've got as practitioners and experts in this space, because the operating environment for large companies is now becoming ever more complex from a regulatory perspective. And I suppose there's that challenge, number one, but then there's a challenge for those organizations. They want to and have been moving from what I would call a fixed cost-based approach, right? They've typically had fixed cost employees. Since the Great Recession, we've seen that trend start to change, where they need a variable cost approach for a whole host of cost saving and flexibility and access to talent reasons. So you've got these twin trends, if you like, of increased regulation, but also increased interest and demand in the high end, high cost independent contractor. And it's really about how that can all fit together. And I think, Kristian, it's probably fair to say that that's where companies like yours come into their own. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an ever moving landscape, right? I mean, I'm talking just domestic here in the US, but there's all sorts of regulations that are happening across. You've got to look at the EU platform directive, right? As another example. In Asian markets, a very, very similar thing. It requires a very different mindset, like you say. If we think of the world of staffing, the world of big companies, it used to just be we're going to hire people full time. They're going to come into an office. They're going to clock in at 9 o'clock and they're going to clock out at 5 o'clock or something close to that, right? Now, folks are working from anywhere in the world, not just anywhere as in like me sitting in my home office, and I could go into the office if I want, but I like being here when the kids come home, apart from when they're noisy. So there is that flexibility, that change, and there are companies, if it's around gig work, it's around remote work, it's around you got to be in the office. There are some that are a little bit more stuck in the mud than others that are open to, it don't matter where this person is, who they are, we're going to leverage them for their skills because we have a finite deliverable and a finite project, and that individual's skills lends themselves to the delivery of that project.
Agreed. The other interesting thing that I'd love to get your thoughts on, Kristian, is what's being described as the labor market paradox, but I think it needs a new naming convention. But in short, we're really looking at a really complex employment landscape, particularly in Western labor markets, whereby most Western labor markets are hovering around the full employment mark, pretty close to it or just under it. And then coupled with that, you've got COVID, which displaced a large amount of workers from the workplace. We're starting to see in some sectors AI actually displacing jobs, and I can think of a number of sectors that we support in my day job where we're actually seeing declining need for people that are being replaced in short by artificial intelligence programs. And then coupled or underpinned or overlaid over that, Kristian, is we're seeing this demographic deficit and demographic decline, particularly in the United States and particularly in Western labor markets such as the European Union, where, in short, there hasn't been enough people produced over the last 50 years to actually come into the labor force. Right. And then, although we've had reduction in forces, particularly in the tech sector, we're starting to see an appetite for hiring come back right across the board. And you've got the skill shortage. So you've got this really fascinating labor and employment market at the moment. And you've got a demand for skills around AI and automation, and companies cannot get the talent they need in their home market. And I suppose, Kristian, I'd love to understand and get your take on, well, what is the solution, if any, to all these problems, or what can organizations think about in order to solve some of those challenges that we've mentioned and get the talent and access the talent that they need, either within their borders or without?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a fascinating thing. I mean, if you touched on a couple of the trends there, I think that's where it all starts, right? It's the macro trends around all sorts of things. I mean, if you look at birth rates, right? Birth rates globally in the past 20 years have dropped 15%, right? So there's less, to your point, there's literally less human beings able to go in and do a job. You couple that with the aging population, the aging workforce, that, take my father-in-law, for example. He retired after 40 years at one employer.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah. It is. In today's context?
Yeah, I was actually at his at the weekend. That will never happen again in our generation, and certainly in my kids' generations and beyond. That ain't happening. The average the average company tenure, not job tenure, for the generations going into the market today is less than 3 years.
Well,
So about like my father-in-law, who, he started his career writing blueprints and ended up being the global head of projects for one of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world. Career ladder, that concept, I'm not saying it's completely gone, but that concept is alien now. People aren't looking for, well, what's my career path? How do I get to be the CEO of it? People are looking for, and again, I don't want to sound like the old man, on the rocking chair out front, but the youngins today, they're looking for instant gratification. They want to come in, they want to do something now, they want to be tied to the vision and mission of the company. I mean, the whole corporate governance and ESG, all of, corporate social responsibility. That's why people want to start working at companies, not because they'll pay you more, and not because, oh, we've got ping pong tables and a bar on a Friday night. I mean, that sounds pretty cool, but people want to have immediate impact. So I think when it comes to that, aligning those trends, aligning those macro trends is huge. The other thing, I mean, I used to work for the NHS, and I joke, and it's somewhat facetious. You literally had to kill somebody to lose your job in the NHS. I mean, it was like heavy unionized. You did performance reviews, but the performance reviews were basically to check that you're still breathing every 6 months. It wasn't around how do you improve yourself as a worker, how do you improve yourself as a person. Very little challenging of skills. And again, this isn't a bashing of the NHS. But you think fast, like here, I was blown away moving to the States and the whole concept of at-will employment, right? Like, yeah, you know what? We can just fire you at any time.
Wow.
And I've never, touch wood, I hopefully never will, maybe after this podcast is said, but I've never been fired. But the concept of that scared the crap out of me. Like, what do you mean I can be fired for no reason, just for anything? Right? So anyway, whether it's the macro trends, all of that, I think there's a bunch of things. The other thing is that I think companies are often fishing in the wrong pool, right? If you think the type that people are looking at, they're fishing in the wrong pool, and in some cases, in the wrong ocean, right? Having a small, localized mindset, well, these are the people that I know, and these are the people that we normally recruit from. And, I've got my trusted staffing suppliers, and I'm just going to keep going there. You've got to look at emerging markets like LATAM, Central Eastern Europe, for high-end technology roles. I mean, some of the leading tech startups are in Israel, for example, right?
Yes.
There's a bunch of talent in those different locales. So companies thinking differently around, well, where can I go? Where can I tap into that? And then the other thing I think is a challenge that we need to get around is that there's one thing to say we've got these emerging technologies and we've got these emerging skills, which is great. But if you look upstream, what are people and kids being taught at school? And then what are they going to college to study? And there's a huge delta. So you can say, look, we've got this cutting edge AI and we've got all this, whiz bang technology out there. But if kids are going and not being exposed to that earlier and, invited on a career journey, as to my earlier point, it's bouncing around companies every 2.5 years. What are they learning, right? How are they picking up those transferable skills that they can take to the next project? So I think you asked what's the solution. I think there's a whole slew of challenges. I think it's around just being open to different ideas and not just doing the same thing that you've always been doing, right?
Yeah. I agree with that analysis and your thoughts, Kristian. The other thing I was thinking about is just in relation to this is, how enterprises have traditionally sourced people is through a mixture of find people is through a mixture of their own employer brand, but also through third party intermediaries, right? So essentially staffing or recruitment vendors. And there's, up until I would say over the last couple of years, there's been a huge reliance and dependency on those suppliers. But I think the wheel is starting to turn in this respect, whereby those organizations are actually going, well, we know the talent we want that actually sits within our organization.
Yeah.
We've either engaged those workers before as
Yeah.
independent contractors, or today's employees might be tomorrow's contractors and vice versa, and how we re-engage those. And let's reduce our reliance upon those staffing suppliers and recruitment suppliers. And I often think that the staffing and recruitment sector specifically, Kristian, is ripe for further disintermediation. What's your take on that? I mean, unless you're a niche provider, it strikes, and you're doing something really amazing, it strikes me that maybe not the whole sector's days are numbered, but there's probably going to be a degree of consolidation and quite a large amount of transformation. What's your take on that, Kristian?
Yeah. I mean, if you think of one of the macro trends that we chatted about a few minutes ago, the birth rate, right? There's going to be less human beings on the earth. You couple that with automation. There was some pretty big Silicon Valley tech companies last week cutting headcount because they're looking at increasing automation. They're looking at replacing people with tech. So I think you've got all of those things going on. So the talent pool and the amount of people that you can pull from is going down each year, whatever it is. Some of the best programs I've seen and some of the leading enterprise clients are taking it one step further and looking at that internal talent mobility. I think P&G is a great example of that, right? So they offer, and they push this out to everybody. You're working on a brand, you've got a skill, you're doing a project here. Once you've done that, we've got another brand over here, right? You've been working for this particular thing, trying to build a marketing strategy here. You want to do the same thing over here? And it keeps that worker engaged, right? It keeps them happy. They're like, okay, great, I've got my next project. And it keeps them within the four walls without them saying, okay, you know what, actually, I'm going to go over to another employee. The balance to that is that sometimes I've heard these stories where the people that have been at the company for a period of time, 10, 15 years, it's actually the reason that they're leaving is because there's people being hired at their level or a level below that's being paid more just because that's what the market is dictating. So these folks are like, well, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna go next door. I'm gonna do the same job there. So the internal mobility is a big thing. And then he touched on the concept of redeployment, the knownness, like who you already have. If I've got somebody that's decided to retire, or I've got an alumni and they want to come back and do work, well, I know who they are. I know the deliverable. We don't have to teach them where the bathroom is. We don't have to teach them what we do for a living. They're in it, right? Because we work a lot with consulting companies, right? The professional services firms, they don't have an appetite to get people in and give them the warm and fuzzies and, let's teach you about average. They need people to come in and go, right? Because their client is paying a good chunk of change for them to go and go fast. So they expect the people that they bring in to support those projects to do the same. So that degree of knownness, like I say, alumni, your silver medalists, the folks that have been through the dance, right, to get in, and they're like, you know what, actually, you're really not a good candidate, but you're not for that one. Bring them back in and do some contract work. The temp to perm pathway, that's another one, right? So it is very different. It's not just I'm going to hire full time or I'm going to hire temp staffing. And again, the old temp staffing model is I just need bums on seats. It don't matter who they are and where they are, and as long as they come in within this price range, I've no guarantee whether that person comes in and does the job. So definitely the redeployment metrics, definitely those things are some of the things that we're seeing our customers jump on, because that's, frankly, it's just easier than finding someone new off the street, right?
Yeah. The other thing, Kristian, that I've become mildly obsessed with is around different talent channels or different talent platforms that aren't, your traditional bricks and mortar staffing or recruitment vendor. Of course, you mentioned the internal skills and talent mobility, right? There's some really cool platforms out there and really great companies like P&G that are deploying and utilizing those. But the way I'm starting to see things in my mind, and I'd be keen to get your thoughts is that as many talent channels as possible should be utilized to help organizations get the talent that they need, right? Whether that's an Upwork, a freelancer.com, a bespoke talent pool that a company like MBO's built, a specific talent platform that finds you creatives only, like Malt or someone like that. Like, it strikes me that it's going to be more about talent channels in order to access a diminishing pool of expertise around the globe. Do you see the enterprise moving in that direction, Kristian, or do you think it's a bit like nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, and it's better to stick to the traditional MSP with the staffing vendors attached to it, a payroll provider, and an expert around independent compliance, etc.? Or are you starting to see adoption, or at least interest in other ways of doing things to afford organizations access to the talent they need when they need it by.
Yeah. I think having a one size fits all model just isn't going to work, right? You've got to have those diverse providers. I mean, you mentioned around the staffing suppliers. If you think of, there are staffing suppliers and staffing agencies that are somewhat generalist, and then you've got some that are super niche. This company over here only goes and helps staffing for clinical radiography type personnel in, the tri-state area, like, really, really niche areas that you mentioned. Same thing on some of these platforms. Some are very tech focused, some are consulting folks, some are more on the creative marketing type personnel. So I think what's important, you can use all of those platforms, but there needs to be some degree of aggregation. And I'm not saying that that's just to say, okay, well, we can't use all of these. But if you look at, those platforms, their business model was largely B2C to start with, and then a bottom-up approach, right? I use Fiverr personally. If I need to have a turnaround project quickly, it's, $80 that I'm paying somebody, and I go to the same handful of people.
Yeah.
Ironically, it's like in Indonesia and Bangladesh, because I just know what they do.
Yes.
I'm not driving an enterprise program. So the challenge sometimes that we see is compliance. It's around cost controls, right? Procurement like to know where the money's being spent. And if you've got all these pockets of the business using these contractors, not to mention information security and data, right? You've got to look at the things like ChatGPT and some of the policies there. But if you think of a human being of, hey, here's my marketing material, throw it over the wall. Can you make it pretty? Who knows if my competitors going to the same people and doing the same thing, right? So information security, data, whatever it is, there needs to be some degree of aggregation and control. In the same way that the MSP industry was formed. The MSP's primary focus back in the day and still is now is an aggregator of your staffing supply chain, right? Instead of having hiring managers say, hey, I need to find someone, here's a list of 150 staffing suppliers that we can go to. I'm going to go to my MSP, and that's what we're paying them for. And they get a markup and what have you for, routing the traffic to different providers. It's the same thing with platforms.
Yes.
You can't just have, and you certainly are not going to see an enterprise adoption if it's just sporadic usage from within the business.
Yeah. I guess it needs some sort of aggregation, and then a visualization layer or an access point layer that can actually,
and
you can feed the talent back into.
Exactly. And like from a decision perspective, right? Something that says, hey, I'm looking to, the best example I've seen recently was if you look at what we do at the minute, right? We turn around, and we as the broader industry and certainly on the enterprise side are saying, I've got a job description. I need to find this person that can do this job description. And I've got some skills within this job description. Go. And I'm going to try and find that. If you flip that on its head and start talking about what's the outcome that I'm trying to drive from a project, what's the right path to go to find that outcome? Is it, hey, I've got this internal mobility and I've got Sue, Bill, and Bob already in the business that we can pull in for a 3-month project at no additional external cost? Great, do that. Is it I've got this freelance channel where I've got this type of skill set that's what they do? Or is it something different?
Yeah.
And I see all these technologies that come out into the market around, we can help optimize, and it's AI driven for job description. And, job taxonomies and job families, and there's 30,000 different job descriptions and titles. That's all fine and dandy. But what do you want to do? What are you trying to get to? What's the project and the deliverable that you're looking to drive to? Start there, and then the rest will figure it out.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't care if there's 30,000 job taxonomies. This is what I care about. I want to get the talent that I need today, or if not today, tomorrow. And I want that talent to be in my organization either directly or physically or remotely, whatever the preference is, and I need them to be compliant. And what interests me, Kristian, is we talk about on-demand talent, but is Is that an unrealistic objective, right? What does that actually mean? Because if you think about most enterprises, even including my own company that we run, I mean, even if we want someone today to work for us tomorrow, right, or work with us tomorrow, right, it's not a case of they can work with us tomorrow, right? They need provisions, we need to do reference checks, we need to, of course you can front load that as much as possible, but you're still talking like 5 days, 10 days, whatever it is. But in your view, Kristian, is there a way that we can speed up the process, particularly for enterprises to make sure that if they do, at least if they're not getting the talent today, they're getting it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, right? So the first of which, well, what type of roles, what types of projects are you looking for that on-demand cycle for, right? If you're looking to bring in a lawyer, a high-end lawyer, or you're looking at bringing a high-end consultant, they're pretty busy, right? They've probably got other projects and they can't just drop it all tomorrow. But if you're looking at somebody that you need a fractional piece of work or a very finite deliverable and it can fit into a queue of them, great. It's around also thinking around, well, what's realistic onboarding expectations? So if everybody needs to go through training, everybody needs to get systems access, given a laptop, go through a background check, be managed from a compliance perspective, yeah, that ain't happening overnight. So what's realistic for that? And what's the population of that that's realistic? So is it an offshore developer that's firewalled off of your main tech stack? Well, that's probably a little bit different to an accounting professional that's getting into the books and looking through it. So I think you've got to treat, again, it's that not a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. The other thing is staffing by its very nature has historically been very reactive, right? I've just sold something, or I need to deliver, I need people, I need them now. And that's where you get the hair on fire, like, oh, where the heck are we going to find these people from? And when you have hair on fire, that's where you get bad experience for the talent. You might not get the best talent. You might pay through the nose because everybody knows when your back's to the wall, I can charge you a little bit more. The best programs that I have personally seen in terms of the efficacy of their program has been those driven with more of a resource management, more of a workforce planning directive, right? Where do we think we need to be in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? You don't have to solve for it and you don't have to get it 100% right. But if companies, for example, know that their strategy in the next 2 years is to be going all in on AI, well, maybe let's start building some talent pools that we can find those people near on demand. If they know that there's an acquisition timeline for companies that they're bringing on and there's a different directive there, we should be thinking about that. So talent pooling, we've had some clients where we've actually stood them up with a virtual talent bench, right? So I gave that consulting example earlier. You think of the use case, company gets a phone call from a private equity firm, hey, we're looking to evaluate this M&A deal and we need to get boots on the ground to figure out the valuation. And we need that to start next week. Okay. Well, let me go find some people wandering around the halls and send them over, right? Versus having a small curated pool of people that there's no guarantee they're all available, but they're certainly qualified, they're certainly interested, and you've done some of the basic infrastructure, background checks, equipment, access, what have you, so that they are ready to deploy. So planning, right? I get it. There's always hair on fire moments. Happens all the time. But the less of those and the more driven by demand, driven by resource management earlier, and having more of a strategic outlook of what does my workforce need to be? What's the right mix for that? And when I say mix, full-time, offshore, nearshore, contingent, what's the right model for different parts of the business?
Yeah, I agree with that, Kristian. I think where I've seen success in the course of my career when organizations need to move towards that just-in-time model of getting talent, right? Because it's never first in time, right? It's not possible, right? On a general basis is where they've really nailed that strategic workforce planning or resource demand planning piece. They know what they need. They know when they need it by. They have a budget allocated to that and it's all planned, right? And then you can all the activities that hang off that need to happen in order to help those organizations get that talent. And I've noticed some really interesting organizations being set up over the last year or so. I noticed the Strategic Workforce Planning Institute over in the UK, and they're producing some really interesting material and content in relation to how to get this right. So I think just for the benefit of our listeners, that they're worth checking out, and we can link that in the show notes. But looking at the current and also to the future, Kristian, one of my concerns, and again, full disclosure, I use AI all the time, right? We're deploying it in our business to make it much more efficient from an experience perspective for our clients and our workers, but also to make us much more capital efficient as a business. I'm using ChatGPT within the parameters that our IT security team allow us to do so, because, you don't want to be dropping in your bloody commercially sensitive material into ChatGPT and then someone else gets it. And of course I found it useful, I found it helpful, it's particularly good for building business cases and market research. But as I mentioned when we first started our conversation, Kristian, we've started to see an impact on our business and within our clients in terms of AI displacing jobs and actually reducing headcount. And looking at some of the sort of more doomsday commentators and analysts out there, including actually the World Economic Forum, although they haven't dressed it up in a doomsday fashion. But it looks like over the next 4 years that there'll be net job losses as a result of artificial intelligence, and they haven't really given a suggestion as to where those jobs will be replaced by. I'm a bit concerned as a father and someone that's pro-human about AI's potential negative impacts on jobs and people as a consequence of that. Do you share those concerns, Kristian, or do you think that, well, maybe actually the glass is half full and the future is bright?
It can go either way of that, right? I mean, it is funny because I think everyone was all excited when, oh, look at all these AI platforms and all of these AI capabilities, and then the narrative shifted to Will Smith and the iRobot movie within like 5 minutes, right? Oh my God, if I ask my computer how to help me build a business case, the next thing that's going to happen is it's going to lock me out of the house and steal my wife and kids. Yeah, look, I think what's interesting around some of the data that you mentioned, I actually just read this survey, and it asked about how likely do you think AI is to take away jobs? And what was interesting about it, I think it was Ipsos that did the survey. What was interesting is that there was a huge regionality in terms of what side it went to. So in the US, for example, there was more people that said, we think it's less likely to create more jobs than it is likely. In countries like China, I think 80% of people are like, oh, it's 100% making more jobs. Because if you think of look at China as an example. Their economy is driven by, sure, we've got tech, but we've got a bunch of people from making the cogs turn in the background. So I do think there's a cultural consideration to it. I think when it relates to our industry, what people are going to be careful of is we're not just introducing technology for the sake of introducing technology, right? And I alluded to one earlier, and I've certainly seen a number of these where it's like, oh, look at this. This is what this app does or this technology does. And it looks cool. It's got a nice interface. The buzzwords, algorithms and AI and NLP and ML and all of that. I mean, it sounds cool.
Yeah.
What's it doing? Right?
Yep.
What's the problem that it's actually solving for?
Yeah.
And sometimes, particularly with some of these emerging technologies, I'm seeing that the problem is somewhat artificial and something that the solution has created versus the other way around, right? And then as it relates to our industry, I think technology's been around for a while. Look at vendor management systems, you look at applicant tracking systems, you look at CRM technology. These are platforms to help people. It isn't platforms to replace people. I'm not getting rid of my sales team and saying, hey, I've got Salesforce. Right? Don't need you anymore. Thanks. If I haven't got people, I don't need the technology. So it's the same with AI. You look at some of the tasks, I think, in the recruiting chain or in the life cycle of an employee management, bunch of application for it. Shortlisting resumes, scheduling interviews. But even the shortlisting of interviews, I mean, there's downsides to that. You see all this about unintentional bias and computer-based bias there. But if it's a raw activity that somebody would have just been click, 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 I'm all for that. When it starts getting into we can do AI-driven interviews, I don't know about you, Connor, but if I applied for a job, I'm not leaving MBO, by the way, but if I applied for a job tomorrow and I had to interview with a computer and a bot, go by. Same way that if I'm annoyed at, my delivery wasn't on time or whatever, I want to speak to a human being. I don't want to get into this endless cycle with a chatbot. So to answer your question, AI has a purpose. It will always have a purpose. The application of it is just going to grow more and more. Automations are going to grow more and more, but it's to help people, in my opinion. It ain't to replace people.
Yeah, it's a augmentation tool, or as opposed to a replacement tool. I think that's a more balanced way to look at it, Kristian. I think I've probably read too much on the negative side of things, and that's probably where I'm drawn to. But I'm broadening my AI reading and research as much as I can to take in the net positive as well as the net negative. But I always love asking this question because I'm always fascinated to hear people's perspective on this. And of course, listen, no one knows the direction of travel. We're just basing this on assumptions or hypothesis and on where this could potentially go, of course. But Kristian, you've been in the HR human capital sector for a number of years now. It's a great sector to be in. It's growing like mad. I mean, if we look at the independent contractor sector in particular, I think SIA, staff and industry analysts, are telling us that it's nearly a $4 trillion US dollar size market. So the upside and the growth opportunities, I think, are tremendous. Of course, there's been competition in the market. There's probably more tech players coming into the market that might not fully, or at least always understand the enterprise contingent buyer. But I suppose my question is, Kristian, have you experienced adversity at any time over your career in this sector, and what have you learned from it, or what have you overcome?
That's a good one. There's definitely a lot of upside. I've definitely been exposed to that. I think adversity, and it's not just our industry, I've seen this elsewhere, but certainly in our industry, it is a challenge or a resistance to change, right? Like if you look at contingent work, in some companies it's like the poster child, and in some companies it's completely forgotten about. It's like, I'm sorry, what do you people do? They must, bless them, they must have a really hard time getting adoption and getting buy-in. But I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, going in with if what we did was very commoditized, hey, we can help you do this, maybe a bit cheaper. Yeah, sure. There's a lower barrier of entry. The biggest adversity and the biggest challenge is getting people, one, that want to change, and two, that can influence change, right? And you mentioned the business case concept before, right? If there's a business case, if there's an outcome that they're getting to, if there's an impact of what they're doing, that's great. But if all that's happening is, hey, I can find you a person a bit cheaper or a bit quicker, it's not going to get there. So the adversity is finding. I don't know if adversity is maybe a challenge. The challenge is finding the right people that really want to drive the bus for change. I mean, I can think of a number of people that are just jumping into my head now as you ask that question, that are real change agents. They are motivated. Their career, their life is around, I don't want to just turn up every day and do the same crap. I really want to drive change. I want to do something different. I want us to look and feel like we're a company 5-10x as big as we are. I want us to adopt a modern business model. I want us to help our customers doing that. They, unfortunately, in every company, you get a lot more in, let's talk about this next year, or we'll put a pin in it for now. And I get it. Sometimes what we're talking about and future of work is not the top priority. But going back to those macro trends and some of the things that we talked about, if you ain't on the journey already, it's going to be a really steep hill at some point, right? You mentioned the growth in independent talent. We do a state of independence report. It's on the 14th year. you mentioned some of the data points. 73 million people that are working independently, this is in the US alone, independently in some capacity, right? Nearly half of them, it's their full-time gig. You go back to the first year that we did this report in 2011, 16 million people, right? So we've seen, yeah, no, so that's happening.
Yeah.
And it ain't flattening. There's nothing, this isn't happening or this isn't happening. So it won't be long until we're at the 80, 90, 100 million people just in this country that are working differently. So you've got to change. You can't just keep doing what you're doing. So I would say that's been the biggest challenge, finding those change agents and helping them influence that change up the chain.
I love that perspective. And Kristian, as I mentioned in the intro, your published content on LinkedIn is prolific, and it's always very interesting. You always have a really unique take on the sector and on different things pertaining to the sector. Is that influenced by what you read or what you consume? Have you read any books recently that you care to recommend that's informing your thinking?
Yeah, I do like to consume a lot of information. I also like to, pick up trends from conversations, right? If you keep hearing the same conversations, one data point isn't a trend, but if you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, then yeah, maybe there's something there. So I do see that a lot. In terms of books, for me, I like, it's a little bit outside of my industry, but I just like the general leadership book. I'm a big sports guy, right? So, anything around leadership principles, it's not necessarily like my favorite. For example, I'm a Man United fan. Okay, so
Come on, me too.
so Sir Alex Ferguson, and for those that don't know, I guess he's like, what do you say? He's like the Bill Belichick meets Phil Jackson I don't know, but for football, real football, where you kick a ball with your foot. His book Leading was unreal. Read that not too long ago. But anything around just taking how to manage people, how to talk about a change agent. That guy came into a organization in the 80s that was not quite as bad as they seem today, but they were pretty bad. But he took them and they won the league 20 times, right? He won everything in the world. And it's about having trust in the people that you manage, being able to influence change, build culture, and drive that from the top down so that everybody's on the same page. So that would be a good one if people haven't read that one.
Yeah, I like that recommendation, and I think it's a great book. Like thinking about that change agent, Kristian, I think from memory, and you mentioned this already, that you work remotely, and I assume elements of your team work remotely. How have you experienced, building a high performing culture in a remote team? Have you found that challenging, or is it just a case of, hey, listen, we're remote. This is the ethos. This is our way of doing things. This is how we're going to do things. This is how we're going to communicate. I delegate my authority to you. How have you managed that change? Because this is an assumption on my part, Kristian, but I assume pre-COVID you might have been less remote, maybe more on premise, if you like. And so, what's been your experience really leading change around that?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because on my team, we just hired a couple of folks. Know the industry inside out, so we don't need to teach them that. But around like, what do we do and how do we do that? And I can imagine it's pretty difficult. I remember when I joined MBO, we were in an office. I would literally walk from office to office and meet people, ask them hey, what do you do? What do we do? How do we support this customer? Oh, hey, I got told about this. What do you do? And there was a lot of just learning through osmosis, right? You jump next door and knock on the door and say, hey, quick question. That doesn't happen as much now. So I think that is a challenge. What I will say is that we as a company have built tremendous infrastructure in terms of making sure that one, everybody's trained, right? And we expose people to different parts of the business. And two, and this is a big, big push, connect with people that you wouldn't normally connect with, right? If I'm on the sales team, we should connect with folks in finance on our product team and our HR team, learn about what they do. And particularly when we're selling, I mean, for us, we don't want to just say, oh, look at us, we're great, and we do really nice things just because we think we are. If you understand what the functions and the different people do, you have the confidence that says, actually, when we help you, onboard a contractor, you can be assured that these people that are actually the person picking up the phone and saying, oh, you're having an issue with your billing, they're great. They know what they're talking about. So that's been a big thing that we've made sure that we're pushing. And then to your point around accountability and delegation, right? Like, we're all grown-ups, right? We don't need babysitting. I've worked in jobs where there's babysitting. As a grown adult, you're like, what did you hire me for? Like, no, I want you to go and make decisions. I want you to learn the best. I forget the gentleman's name, but he was in the Navy, and he wrote a book, and it was around leadership styles and learning styles. And there's the bottom rung of the ladder, which is going and asking people every day, everything, hey, what do you do? How do you do this? And then you've got progressively moving up that ladder, talking about, well, hey, I recommend this. Or do you think that this is the right approach? Or evidence-based, this is what I recommend based on like having that autonomy to go and make decisions. And you learn from failure, right? So say I've got 2 kids, right? I mean, I love kicking their butt at games, right? Because I don't want to give it to them. You've got to learn from losing. You've got to learn from your mistakes. And you can't do that if you've just got somebody looking over your shoulder every 5 seconds. So remote has definitely driven that, because I physically can't be in their house. But I think it's changed the culture, our company and certainly other companies, to trust who you work with, collaborate, right? Use the tools that you've got to collaborate, but trust. Let people do the job that you've hired them to do.
Yeah, I love that, Kristian. I absolutely love that trust piece. And no one wants Big Brother. At least I don't. I think I would find that I'd be culturally incapable of working in that way, I have to say. It would send me insane. So, Kristian, we covered a lot of topics today, but one of the things I'd like to close our conversation on is looking towards the future. And of course, there's that Yogi Berra prediction, that as Yogi Berra quote, that it's really difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. But we'll ask you a question we ask all our guests, which is this, Kristian. What if any is your prediction or predictions for the future of work?
Yeah, I'll avoid the cliche one of saying AI and automation, because I think everybody's going to talk about that. For me, I think it's the talent pool. We live in a global economy, a global talent economy, right? Compared to days gone by where you hire somebody that you know that might be in the town that you're in, and hey, we're looking for somebody to come in, and you got to be in this office from 9 to 5 to sit in a cubicle and never speak to anybody. You can have people on board from anywhere. You can have people work from anywhere. Of course, there's considerations for compliance and for cost and data security, all that stuff. But I think that's the big thing. We're already seeing the market rates balance, right? It used to be, I'm going to go to India or Mexico or Bangladesh because it's cheap as chips, and I'm going to find talent to do that. Well, guess what? These folks aren't cheap as chips anymore. And by the way, they're bloody good, right? Like, I'm going to go to high-end cutting-edge technologists in Central and Eastern Europe. I'm going to go to Asia Pac because they're teaching this at colleges. They're teaching this how to do it. So global talent mobility is going to be a huge thing that just continues to grow. The fluidity of where people can work and where they do work. And I think the other thing, and it ties into that trust and some of those things that I mentioned about well-being, right? Just there's a lot more of a push. I've certainly seen over the past few years, the barriers have been removed to say, hey, I actually need help, right? Whether it's around in your job or, from a mental health perspective, and there's more focus around employee well-being. I think that's important because as we shift to a project-based deliverable, get this done by a certain time, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that we are human beings. At the end of the day, we're not machines that's just been put in some instructions and do it. We are human beings. We need to be given direction. We need to be given trust, but we need to be, nurtured and cared for and looked after. And particularly in a remote environment, it's not like we can all get together for happy hours every Friday and we can all do, all hands in the office. Companies have got to adapt. Companies have got to change. So I think there's going to be more focus around that, employee well-being, and that's going to ultimately drive engagement and happiness, right? You don't have to keep hiring new people every 5 minutes if you keep the people you've got happy.
Yeah, I love that, Kristian. I think that's a really optimistic and may I say lovely way to end our show today. I love the optimism, and I love that putting the human first. And I actually think in the age of AI, that's ever more important and should be seen as important as well. So, Kristian, loved getting together to record the show today. Thank you so much for your time and making the time for me and indeed our audience. Kristian, where's the best place for our audience to reach out and find out more about MBO, but also to reach out and chat to you?
Yeah, sure. I would certainly. As you mentioned earlier, I'm pretty present on LinkedIn, so I would definitely use that as a channel. Obviously, we've got the MBOpartners.com website where folks can dig into. But definitely feel free to reach out to me. Drop me a note through LinkedIn. And again, if for me, what's the beauty of our industry is that it's very open and about sharing, right? I don't need to sell to everybody that I speak to. I genuinely have a passion to learn and share some insights. And if they help people, great. So, open network, and certainly that would be a good channel there.
Thanks, Kristian. And listen, thanks so much for sharing your insights today, Kristian. It's great to see you, and look forward to seeing you in person later this year. And a very happy new year to you and all your team, Kristian. Thanks so much for your time. And I'll be seeing you soon. Take care, man.
Thank you for listening to the Open Talent Report with Connor Heaney. If you found this podcast informative and engaging, make sure you subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on all your favorite streaming platforms.